Alrighty, folks. Welcome back to the Mushing Alaska podcast. We're your hosts, Brendan and Sean. And as always, excited to bring you another episode. This episode will be featuring Aaron Peck. And we were super excited to talk to him. And well, before we get into all that, Sean, how's it going, bro? Nice to see you.
Dude, it's like Christmas or whatever, Christmas Eve, Christmas weekend, pretty quiet weekend for me when I go see the cousins and the uncle and aunt. And then I'll be, making everybody's dreams come true this week. I'm going to be, working in it and doing some tours. And that's going to be, it's nice. It's like people's bucket list thing that they're doing, and you get to be a part of it. It'll be fun. But yeah, I'm doing good. How are you?
Have you seen any I would literally today at the in-laws Christmas that I was at, I was trying to sell someone on Alaska, and I was talking about the
Dude,
North. I was talking, dude. I mean, every time.
talk about it, dude.
So I was talking about Northern Lights, and just hearing you kind of talk about doing your tours. Just wondering if you've seen any good lights, either in just on the job or just in general.
Yeah, no, I saw some. I don't know. I feel like every time I see a good show, I'm
Yeah,
always
get
like,
the fuck out
this.
of here with this.
What's that?
I
I'm just saying.
say,
What? Go ahead. Go
you,
ahead. Share your thoughts, Brennan.
share my thoughts. I just wanted a question about the Northern Lights, and then you gotta hit me with this. Well, like I've seen so many of them before that it's really hard to tell if they're even good anymore. The ones that I've seen
Well,
or
it just sucks.
whatever.
That's not okay. All right, fine. I'm sorry. I did sound a little pretentious then. You're right. But I just think, like you just get really excited when you see a good show. It's like I'm always inclined to say this is the best show I've ever seen in my life. But it's like, it's hard to remember the previous good show from 2 or 3 years ago. But it was cool, man. It was like, and it was first time I've like taken photos of it. They're like, that's kind of when you do these Northern Lights things, you kind of got to get a photo that's good or it didn't happen.
Yep. Yep.
And, a lot of times the Northern Lights aren't that good, or they are good, but they're not great. But getting a good photo can make them look like even greater. And it's not like they're not great. I mean, it's not like a false photo, but like, the aperture settings and, the ISO,
Oh man.
photographers know what's up, dude.
Literally
All
lost
my
me.
fellow
Aperture?
photographers,
Aperture.
the
What?
exposure time,
Hmm. Okay. Yeah.
you get there, but I did learn this about 3 days ago, but I'm officially a professional photographer.
I think the word of the episode is going to be aperture. I
Aperture.
like it.
You know
Yep.
about the aperture, man. You know how it is.
So anyways, well, moving on. So last time I was mentioning what's behind me, and this next phase of things being incorporated in the background is starting to happen. So I got the bookshelf. Now you can
Mm.
see bookshelf is covering
Dude.
covering the shirt that was there, and kind of covering Alaska a little bit here, but we're working on it. And we've got some submissions of some artwork that will be hanging up for our next recording. So I'm excited about that. So shout out to the folks that have been sending those to us, and I'm excited to print them out and all of that. And
That
kind of
means we got
just
some sponsorships. It sounds like, because I got some sponsorship ideas, dude. I think I know a couple sponsorships we're gonna have in the next episode. So it sounds like we've already been sponsored by the person who's submitting these arts. Yeah,
yeah, I mean, I want to print them out, get them hung, and officially,
yeah. We need
let's
to,
not get ahead of
not
ourselves
get too
here.
excited.
Okay,
Yeah, no
so
sponsors yet,
no,
but they
no,
will
no,
be.
we don't know anything about a sponsor.
But
But
I'm sponsoring
anyways,
you. Okay,
my guy, I appreciate that.
and you sponsor me. All right.
So, bro, we've had some races, and I don't know what you're thinking about, but I will just throw it to you. Let's break down one of these races here.
I caught it, and I think the thing I was thinking about recently about the Connect 100 was that it's cool because like a lot of these like longer races, like it's cool that they have like I don't know. I've definitely seen some 300s that on the same weekend that have 100. Well, like if you have like a 300 or like Nick has a 200, and then they make the 100 happen 2 weeks before the 200. It just kind of like is the perfect timing for everybody's training and where they're at. You know, like it's still we're in peak training, but like that's like the right time of the year to do 100-mile event. uh Doing 100-mile event in March, it's like, all right, well, the dogs are in good enough shape to go a little bit farther than that, where at this point 100, it's kind of like a nice like test for your team, see kind of where they're at. It doesn't mean a bunch going like forward as far as like how competitive is your team going to be in these longer races, but it definitely means something. I mean, like if you're doing cruising through a 100-mile run, dude, I was looking at the times. Dude, Emily Robinson, dude, it's like 40-minute win. It's pretty crazy for a 100-mile race. Uh, but it was just like a lot of good big names and amazing dog teams in this race. And it's like a good, it's like, ah, it's more, I think it's more than spring training would be for baseball. But like you need to take these steps, if these mushers haven't been in a race since last year. It's good to get that like race start energy, race event, just kind of get some reps in. And then this is a really exciting event, and there's a ton of great photos and videos all over the Connect 200's Facebook.
Yep.
And I definitely encourage you to check them out. There's interviews, and it's on the Connect 200's page, but it's for the Connect 100. If that isn't confusing, that's why. So yeah, we're looking at the teams. Brennan pulled it up all like slyly. That was sick. And of course, yeah, Emily's like a total shark with these 50 to 150-mile races.
Dude, okay. I looked at this and the first thing that I was like, I am gonna ask Sean about this. So on the second day, like on day one, right, you have like a difference of a couple minutes between, number one on down, right? Like Emily did it in 4:33, Will Rhodes did it in 4:35, then Travis Beals 4:44. Like the separation there is like kind of close. And then on day two, Emily finished it 40 full minutes ahead of Will Rhodes. And I'm just like, what led that to happen? Because I just would have expected it to be a closer, on day two alone, that the gap would be closer. I was just curious, like conditions. Is it like, is her dogs are just better at that high speed? What's going on? Talk to me.
I think that training and conditioning is a huge part of that. Having She just raced the Ace race, which was another super fast race and a longer run, in the sense that it was 64 miles, and it was just one run. But then they ran that 64 miles back. But yeah, she was running them fast too. So and then there's just the cumulative training that she's done doing this distance, 50, 100, 150 miles over the last multiple years with the same dog team. So they have this cumulative experience, cumulative conditioning and training. And a lot of these teams are, this is almost a sprint race for them, some of these guys. And maybe I don't want to like it. I mean, on paper, it looks like Emily has a better conditioned dog team for this event. I mean, that's
Right.
ultimately what it looks like, but I'm not the one there in training, seeing all these guys train their dogs. That might not be the case, but a lot of these guys are training for longer events, and this is like a stepping stone for their dog team. And you can take like a pretty like not not that conditioned of a team, and you can run them 50 miles like pretty fast. But then you'll see the drop in speed the next day. Then
Right.
that's how tough these dogs are. And like they won't even blink an eye. They'll just go 1 mile an hour slower, 2 miles an hour
Well,
slower. And that adds up a lot over 50 miles.
I
And
I I
yeah,
also
it's a little bit of that. That's what I think. I don't know for sure.
I'm not sure that we've really talked much about the format of this race in terms of it being day one is a 50-mile run, then you like sleep it off, and then day two you do it again. The same, I guess you go back to the same spot, right? So like
Yeah.
that's an unusual race
Stage race.
structure in itself, right?
Yeah, it's a stage race. It's not unusual. It's just unusual for what we cover typically. We're more like concentrating on mid distance races, but like these are all like I think kind of some of the reason we get excited about this is firstly our podcast name's Mushing Alaska. This is Mushing in Alaska, so we're going to talk about it. Secondly, all these almost way over half of these people are going to be running mid distance races. These are the same dog teams, same people that are gonna, and this is kind of that kind of for its own. It's this feels like week one of the season kind of, and
Right.
you know it's pretty competitive race. People were running fast. I mean, like even if you got 11th place in this race, you're running 50 miles in 5.5 hours. That's fast.
Right.
Been doing it twice. That's Swamp Dog Kennel right there. Shout out to Anya and Hannah coming in with a pretty respectable. I say that because I know those guys, and but yeah, there's something to be said for how fast those Emily's run is, and Will Rhodes and Brenda Mackey come. They have the same. Will Rhodes and Brenda Mackey are, to my understanding, a pair, right?
Right.
They're
Yep.
partners and are so that's pretty impressive to have the same kennel finish second and third. That's pretty insane. Um, and a lot of Reddingtons, like three, and a Boozer, and a Riley Dyke, and a Travis Beals, and his wife Sarah Stokey, uh, and four Reddingtons. And then I love the last name Vanderhoof. Just like to say that out loud one time. So I did. Mike Parker, after having that terrible incident just a week before coming out and getting to the finish line with like I'm telling you, like even if him finishing 23rd here, it's like, dude, you run your dogs 50 miles in less than 6 hours. Like that's a pretty fast run. And so I don't know. I think it's kind of impressive finishes from everyone.
Yeah. I mean, the difference of the finisher at 9:15 and the last person at 14 hours is kind of interesting. I mean, most of the folks are in at 12 hours.
Yeah,
So
pretty much
between 9
everybody
and
got under
12,
12 except for five people. And that's and those five people that didn't get under 12, like, it's not like that their goals weren't to win the race. Their goals
right.
are to train their dogs. And so, whatever. Um, but yeah, it's fast dog teams and yeah, I'm excited to go and check out the Connect 200 and see a lot of these teams back in it.
Nice. Yeah, and there's also something to be said like and you kind of were hinting at it, but with Emily, like this is kind of her bread and butter right now. Whereas most of those other mushers in the race this is just kind of like part of the training plan that gets them along the way. So goals are different in that regard as well, right? Emily probably wanted to go out and win the race, whereas like Ryan Reddington coming off that dead rod last year, you would be like, oh, he should probably be a little bit up higher up, but it's not the case, and but his goal probably isn't to win the Knick
Yeah,
100.
that someone like Ryan and Travis Beals, and I mean, but like, yeah, and so they're just doing their big pictures. I did a rod for those guys, and but yeah, I mean, I still think this is a pretty insanely legitimate event, and
Right.
really impressive times and speeds, and really good for the dogs to be able to get that exposure to being around 30 dog teams, and for the mushers and the start line energy to do that two times, not just one time, have that start line energy. And, it's going to pay. I think this is the results of this. You can look at them and they do mean something, uh, you know, to finish well in this race. It's a good step for your dog team moving on into, the new year, when you're going to see all these dog teams, or some of these dog teams, in these longer events.
Right on. Well, the other thing I wanted to ask, like, so with some of these shorter events, we're talking about the Knick 100, we talked about the Ace race, we've got a couple of like the Solstice 50 and stuff. So from an Iditarod perspective, when you're looking at the results, do you even at all see those results and think, oh, well, this means that maybe their team looks like they'll do something for the Iditarod, or is it just like kind of a grain of salt? Like
Grain of
these
salt.
rate. Okay. Gotcha. Gotcha. Okay.
But it means something. It does mean something. It's not like nothing, you know. But like,
Well,
if you had a terrible Connect 100 and you're running the Iditarod, that doesn't mean it's like, all right, you got 3 months to develop your team and give them the attention and training and care or whatever that they need. And if you win this race and your goal is to win the Iditarod, I don't think that means you really have that much better of a chance of winning the Iditarod. But it does mean that your team is looking good in December. They need
right
to look good
on.
in March, though.
Yep. All right, so let's move on from the Knick and we'll hit what, the Solstice 50?
Yeah. Are you doing your special magic trick with that? I was sick where you pulled it up and I didn't have to do
Uh,
my end.
well, if you want to like send the link while you talk about it, I could pull it
All
up.
right, I got it. I got it up on. I'm not going to share the screen because that seems like way above my pay grade. But the Solstice 50 up in Fairbanks, another similar event where you can run your dog fast. Holy crap, dude. The guy that won this ran the same distance in 3 hours, 55 minutes. And he has one of the most incredible first names I've ever read off in my life. Do you see it, Brennan?
Hit me with it.
Sean, Sean. So
Spelled
Sean Dawalski with the dub, and Jonah Bacon running the Deke Nachtenborgen's dogs. Sorry, Deke, for the last name.
Knockborn.
I'll get it right one
Knockborn.
day.
Come on.
Nachteborn.
No, no, no. Don't say the T. Knockborn.
Knackborn.
Knockborn.
Knackborn.
I think. We'll see.
Okay. I don't know. Now
We'll
you
get a
say
letter. We'll get a letter from
I don't
Deke.
trust you at all. Anyways, yeah, that's some fast times. Yeah, that's a sprint, 50 miles one time, literally the second to last place ran in 5 hours and 20 minutes. So yeah, that's
it's a difference of an hour and a half.
Fast, really fast. And it looked like it was super fun. That seems like a really fun event, let's just open up. Let's just let off the brake and let these guys just roar. So yeah, you got, I don't know a lot of these names. It's like a whole nother scene up there. The Two Rivers is got and what, from my understanding, a really like close knit and a good mushing community. Like a lot of co-ops exist up there in Two Rivers, where you have 5 cabins in a community with 5 dog teams, and so if someone leaves to go on vacation, someone else can help feed your dogs, kind of thing. One of those setups that I've always kind of daydreamed about, doing something like that with my friends. They got that up there in Two Rivers. So I'm assuming some of those people are on this list. And yeah, it looks like some fast dog teams. And
I know I believe I saw Lauro Eklund and Matt Hall's significant others in that race. Because I know I saw a picture of them sitting in the lodge together.
Yeah, okay, gotcha. Yeah, they're handlers. Right
Yeah.
on.
No, I don't even. Maybe the handler, but I thought it was their significant others. I thought it
Uh,
was their ladies. Again, I don't know. I don't
gotcha.
know them like that, so I don't know their names. But anyways,
Yeah, I don't know them like that either. Well, we'll learn. We'll learn. So we got time.
so and then was there any other races that have been
The
going on?
Cusco
I think
50 you were telling me
yeah, we got a
about, like
Cusco 50 literally
Raymond
happening as
Alexi,
we.
dude, the total like just owns every single event in Bethel except, of course, the 300. But this guy's got fast dogs. So I bet you he'll be winning some more events this winter. And Pete Kaiser was in it and finished in second place. And I remember at the end of the Cusco 300, he was joking, saying to Raymond, like, "Hey, thanks for letting me win one." Because he had won all the other races in Bethel.
Nice. Well, I guess I think that's most of the things that we wanted to cover before we kind of did a little intro to Aaron's interview. So yeah, I had a few things that kind of stood out to me with our interview with Aaron, but yeah, what was anything that you wanted to kind of touch on?
Well, yeah, I mean, Aaron reached out to us after Connor. I guess we had Connor
Actually,
on, and
dude,
Connor for Aaron. What's
are
up?
are you ready for this? So we assumed collectively, Sean and I, that we had Connor McMahon on, and freaking, we assumed that Aaron just maybe talked to him or someone was like, all right, I got to get on the podcast. Right. No, he didn't talk to us at all. He just straight up wrote us an email and was like, hey, I'd love to get on your podcast. You guys are doing a great thing for the sport and would love to talk to you guys. And so, like, I was talking to Connor the other day and I asked him, I'm like, did you talk to Aaron, by the way? Like, did you kind of set this up in a way? He's like, no, I haven't talked to him since we did our interview.
Hmm.
So I thought that was kind of funny.
Yeah. Also, I do want to say that at one point Aaron asked. Well, firstly, Aaron did email us. Yeah, say, hey, can I come on the podcast? And I told Brendan. Brendan was like, hey, uh, should we have like is it Aaron Peck on the podcast? And I was like, dude, if Aaron Peck asks you to be on your podcast, you'd say yes a million times. And then uh he he asked me at some point, he was telling me this story about seeing my dog team at the cabin there between Iditarod and Ophir. I can't remember the name of it, but he said, "Oh yeah, I had this lead dog. I was barking, screaming to go, and it was minus 57 degrees or whatever." And I couldn't remember his name in the moment for some reason, but I like the second we clicked, I remembered his name is Bishop, and he was on Dallas's winning team in 20 or maybe
21.
he wasn't on his winning team. No, but he was on his like second place teams in 17 or third or whatever he got, 17, 18. And went to Norway, I think, with him as well. And he was a really good dog for Dallas. He was like the cheerleader for my team, super smart leader, but not like he didn't really pull that much, and he runs like kind of like sideways. But he's like got a really good attitude and eats really well. And to have just like one cheerleader, I don't want to have like all my dogs barking and screaming, but it's like nice to have that one token loudmouth dog that's just screaming, and everyone else is like, dude, you know what time it is? Can you just like turn down the volume? And he's like, no, it's time to go. We gotta go. And then we start running, and he's like, not really pulling that hard, but I'm like, he seems happy. It's probably helping out the rest of the team. So left him on the team. And he provided a lot of value that way. So thanks, Bishop.
Nice. Nice. Yeah. I really enjoyed our time with Aaron. And the thing that was really interesting, a lot of this episode, actually, we talk a lot about the Yukon Quest and some of the changes in the format. I was really intrigued. They talk about It's 40 hours of rest for the race. That's
Was it
mandatory.
40? That's crazy, dude. It's
40.
such a crazy, like, this is the most out there set of rules
Yeah.
there is
And I
in mush,
think if I
period.
recall, it
You
was
know, and it's kind of cool.
22, 22 hours can be, I might have this wrong. He tells it in this episode, but if I recall, it was like 22 hours are at checkpoints, and then the other you can take in between checkpoints. And I guess in the Yukon Quest, you have checkpoints that are kind of like further distances, right? So you don't, it
Right.
doesn't like from a strategy standpoint, it doesn't leave a lot of different options in terms of like breaking up your rest.
You kind of, and
And
basically
so,
forces mushers, if you have these long runs, like it forces you to just run the whole way. If it's a 90-mile run or whatever, it's like, well, now you can rest on the trail and not, and you don't have, like, you can stay competitive and still only run 50, 60 miles at a time. And before you bed down your dogs, and they have two different trackers systems that, they kind of have like a contingency plan for technical difficulties, and I think it's a good experiment, and it seems like kind of an evolutionary step in the right direction with mushing, because it's, yeah, going on these long runs is so you can train your dogs to do it. Dogs do that fine. But it's certainly not for every dog team. I think honestly, every dog team is capable of running those 50, 60-mile, 45-mile runs. That's if you train your dog team well and just put in the, miles with them. Going and running them 45 miles at a time, any dog team can do that. Not every dog team can do this 80-mile runs. You can train them for it. It's not for everybody though. So it's kind of not, I think it's a little bit more of like an inclusive race, and it can still have the competitive element to it and not lose that by doing this. And he was
yeah.
really excited about that, and that we learned a lot. Like while we were, I felt like a little underprepared. Just like I didn't know all these rules. I didn't know you freaking 40 hours of rest. That's sounds crazy at first. You hear that and you're like, whoa, 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 pump the brakes. And then Aaron kind of breaks it down, and you're like, oh,
Well,
okay,
and
kind of
if you
like,
think about it, like in the course of the race, you're probably going to take that much rest anyways, right? So, like now they've kind of folded it in to include rests and anywhere, and I think it creates more competitiveness in the race. It keeps the dogs healthier. In is kind of a point that he was making. Um, yeah, I don't know. I was interested. I think that you all will enjoy hearing that. Um,
got me really excited about the Quest Canada.
Yeah,
Yeah.
100%.
I was just, I
And
mean, like, because Canada is just, it's another place somewhere else. And I just like struggle to connect with it as much because I've only been there a couple times. And now I'm like, Aaron, like, okay, I'm kind of excited about this. This is going to be something that even if not other races if they don't adopt this, I think it still has its place. Like it's a cool niche
yep,
idea at the worst, and then maybe this is something that you'll see other teams or other races,
races.
use similar set of rules. Maybe they won't do exactly like that, but they might make those adjustments. But I mean, it seems like just an all around positive idea. And that's kind of what we were like, wanted to hear about Aaron Peck's, adventures. But
We
then he started
barely
talking
we
about this
barely
race and
got
we were like,
stories
actually,
about the
this is pretty cool.
Iditarod. Yeah. Yeah.
Huh?
Well, as I said, we barely got any stories of
Yeah.
actual like,
We'll
oh,
have
tell
him,
us
we'll
about
have
a
him on
crazy
again.
story on the Iditarod trail. Like we didn't I think we had like 10 minutes left and we were like, well, let's try to talk a little bit about it. But
Yeah. We'll
it
get there
was
with
one of
him
the it
another
was
time.
I mean, honestly, like I don't feel like like I think we did really good with what we talked about, and it was a little bit
Yeah.
different than always focusing on the Iditarod, and I'm cool with
Yeah,
that.
that's true.
The other
Yeah.
thing that I
You can
thought
do
was
that.
really interesting, and maybe I'm getting this wrong, but I feel like he talked about being, I think it's an ambassador for the race, right? So he like does a lot of stuff behind the scenes in terms of
He's like
reaching
the
out.
musher representative.
Right. Right. That's probably the better term or whatever. But it was interesting to hear him talk about his role in doing that and reaching out to the mushers and getting feedback on different sorts of things related to the race. So
Dude,
overall,
three
yeah,
back-to-back Canadian mushers. Well, they're not Canadian necessarily, but we had Rob, we had
Connor.
Connor before that, and now we got Aaron. Rob's, he's not Canadian, but he lives in Canada. And
Yep.
so these guys, it's kind of cool,
This is like the Canada tour of our
It's like
podcast, I
Canada, yeah,
guess.
It's like, I don't know. I thought it was kind of a neat thing
We're
that we
trying.
did.
Hey, for those of you
It just kind of
guys,
worked out that way.
for those of you guys who don't know a lot about the Canada folks, like we're trying to like spread the love here, like so. But yeah, no, we've still got several others. We've got lined up. We've got who do we have next? We recently just did
Isaac?
Isaac. Yeah, Isaac Tiford, and then right before that we did Josh McNeil. So those are also,
Joshy.
yeah,
That's
the
not what
Josh was a
I've never
great
called
one
Josh
too.
Joshy. I'm sorry for saying that. Never once
But
will I call him that.
well, before we transition over to the interview, anything else that you want to squeeze in?
Nope.
Alrighty, folks. Well, we appreciate y'all turning into another podcast of ours. This is going to be a nice listen with Aaron Peck. And until next time, y'all enjoy. Alrighty, folks. We've got our next guest on, Mr. Aaron Peck, coming to us. Welcome on. Thanks for reaching out and asking to be a part of this, man.
Yeah, well, I invited myself. That's true, but I just not so much for myself, but I just felt it was timely to throw a shout out for the Yukon Quest Canada. There, I've just been involved with that this year, and yeah, I just want to get the word out because it's a special race. It's an awesome race, and I just like to share some of that, and we can go wherever it goes.
Awesome.
What is your role with the Yukon Quest Canada?
So, yeah, I was up there this summer, and my buddy Nathaniel Hamlin, we were just catching up, and he's an awesome guy. And he was just, there's less and less mushers around. The old guard's kind of moved on. There's been some flow in and out of the board, and he's like one of the last mushers left, kind of holding on, and he's a young guy. And I just, it just struck me like I got to step in now. I've always stayed on the sidelines and felt my role as the participant, but it just seemed timely and appropriate to kind of throw my hat in the ring. And they just needed a musher representative at that moment, so the timing was good. So I just jumped in there, and they were unanimously welcomed me in there. So yeah, it's been a big learning experience, and yeah, it's been great.
Yeah, there's all these races have a committee, and my understanding, from what I've seen in the Iditarod at least, is that there's a musher representative, and because the race is trying to organize things well, but a lot of times the race committee doesn't understand the perspective of what it's like being on the trail and with the dogs. And so you're kind of it's like the NFL Players Association or the NBA, or you pick what hockey too. I guess you're not doing NFL in Canada, huh? But yeah, so what are some of the behind the scenes things that you're doing that, and the committee's doing with you, to make this event happen? And
so my role in the beginning, it hasn't been that intense for me, honestly. Although I want to, Abby and Ben is the new director. He was hired on earlier this year, having not been involved in mushing before, but he is a hehistory and a lot of experience in the corporate world, and he's a young, energetic guy who's just on it. He's driven. He's just dialed right in. What he's doing behind the scenes for this race is really positive, and he's just efficiency in the back end is pretty and Abby's been his right hand helper. So their boss contribute. We vote on ideas and put our thoughts out there, in the meetings and stuff like that. And what, a lot of people probably understand, whether it's Iditarod or these other races, you have a lot of members on a board, and the musher representative is just one of those voices, So if a topic comes up that might pertain directly to the mushers and what would the mushers think of this, then my voice is taken with more, I have a louder voice in maybe that moment, and other issues that are coming up, maybe with the finances and that sort of thing. I'm not really contributing to that part of it's, you have to compromise, of course, and be willing to hear all the different opinions. And that's the point of having the board. And there's so much more going on with the race than just the mushers. And I think on Iditarod, there's a 12-member board or something, and only one of those seats is a musher rep. So
right,
as the musher, you think you're kind of the center of things and everything should revolve around you. But in the end, there's so many things going on behind the scenes that we mushers don't really have any idea about.
Yeah, put me on that list. I don't know what, showing up to the race, it's just such a magical thing to get out there on the trail. You got your dog team, you've been training, working hard all winter in some quiet place, and then you show up to these events and it really typically goes pretty smoothly, and you got a marked trail with veterinarians everywhere and a home cooked meal and a mat to sleep on in a warm place. It's pretty amazing what is able to be pulled off on small and larger scales. And Brennan, you on the Yukon Quest, you kind of started paying attention to the mushing scene kind of right at the last 1,000-mile quest. Not to say that it won't happen again, but it's the most recent one. And so the 450, right? It's a 450 for the Canada Quest.
Yes, it's a 450 and a 250 and a 100.
Okay, so you got 2 Iditarod qualifiers or Quest 1000 qualifiers potentially, and so it's a new. I mean, it's kind of like a new thing, right? Before we had to COVID happened, international, communications got complicated. And, we still quite haven't put the Band-Aid over that wound yet. But, it seems like the whispers and rumors that I hear from the Quest committees, both sides and social media and whatever, is that, there's hope that we can pull off that long event again. But the 450 is happening in Canada, and then there's the same thing happening in Alaska. So you're almost completing this whole trail, and it's all happening the same weekend. It's that's a crazy weekend, man. You got 7 races happening on the same day.
Yeah, it is a big weekend. And so I'll give you a little when I first got involved here, I set out to gather intel. I felt, what does the distance mushing community really want in a race? So for the Yukon Quest Canada to be successful, we got to kind of tune into what the mushers are looking for. Bigger vision might be that this is a race that stands alone as a prestigious, 450-mile race, and maybe someday 1,000-mile race. The other side of it, though, is this 450. And I really came at it from an Iditarod perspective, because that's where the bulk and the core of the long distance mushers are headed. So they would look at this as the ideal qualifier. So for me, I really think a 450 is superior to a 300 or a 250. I think what you can gain on that 450, not only as a qualifier, but as a primer, a setup, a training exercise for your Iditarod. So if we're going to get maximum entries, we got to appeal to the Iditarod group of mushers and for the people wanting to qualify. So the timing was really important. So the year prior, there was some compromises made with the Alaska side of the Quest to stagger the dates 2 weeks apart, hoping that teams would run the Fairbanks race and then come down and run the Whitehorse race. Well, that didn't really materialize. And most mushers that did run Fairbanks, they didn't have the energy or didn't want to spend the money to make that extra trip down, and we saw very low entries. And so I set out a survey to probably 110 mushers off the email lists from my Iditarod and the Quest. And, some people I missed. We got a lot, though. We got about 44 people to respond. About 50% of them were Quest. 50% of the respondents were Iditarod-minded people. And the results were pretty interesting. It was big on February 3rd. But we're going to do our own thing now. And this is what's best for our interests here in Canada. We got to set this time up for the Iditarod participants that may want to participate. And there's quite a bit of valuable information came in from that survey that, we can expand on.
So I'm curious if you can take us a little more behind the scenes in terms of down the road, like, where do you see the two coming together? What is it going to take? And where, do you think that progress is being made as we speak, or is it still kind of at a standstill?
Yeah. So there's people involved longer than me that were involved at the time, through that breakup, through COVID and all that. And there was some things that went down, and I don't know all the ins and outs of that. What I do know is that Ben, our executive director, his arms are wide open, and he has reached out the hand multiple times. And there is radio silence coming back from Alaska. There's off the record little hints that maybe it will come eventually, but there's board members in Alaska that maybe are still not trusting for whatever reason. I don't know. So the goal for Canada is to have 1,000-mile race, and ideally back to Fairbanks. But if Fairbanks doesn't want to do it, and nothing gets organized over there to help it materialize, the Canada side will possibly develop its own 1,000-mile race strictly in Canada. And either way, we're headed for a 1,000-mile race in the near future, if all things align as we hope they do. But that's kind of about as much as I know, on that back end stuff. So,
is there a relative timetable on when they're trying to have a 1,000-mile race in place, whether it is including Alaska or not?
The goal is next year. That's the push. There's the desire for that. There's other people up in the northern stretch, up the trail, so to speak, in the Yukon that have some pretty wonderful ideas on how to expand this thing. They don't want to go to Dawson and then return to Whitehorse on the return and out and back. They'd like to. There's some voices being echoed that would like to see it carry on north of Dawson to some uncharted territory there, which would be really exciting there's some communities up there. So, I just throw that out as a I'm not on the really, and that's coming down the road, but I'm just saying that's where the executive director and the board and in the Yukon, that's where their mindset is.
I mean, yeah, that sounds, the idea of a new, race in the Yukon sounds, I'm super curious about where that, trail might be, and we're not going to know today. And, and hopefully, it works out between the Alaska side, Fairbanks side, and you guys, and things are complicated, but I hope everyone keeps in mind, we're all pushing for mushing to continue on and see this next generation of dogs and mushers continue to grow, and that's why we're all hanging out and talking right now.
Yeah, exactly. I just also want to mention to do with that topic, and I don't know the exacts, but I don't want to. There's part of the reason the race is having and it may not just be I don't know, philosophy or people or relationship driven. There's also a trail issue up by Eagle, past Eagle, I think. On the Fairbanks side of Eagle, I don't know the trail. I haven't traveled beyond Dawson myself. So other people know it so well, but apparently there's been a big washout. There's a big section of trail that's just been destroyed by Mother Nature. And to get through would take a serious rebuild. And it's such a remote area. The time and money to get out there and make that happen is like not possible right now, apparently. So yeah, that's another physical reason that's preventing the race from joining up again, which that's as much as I know about that.
Yeah, that's
something else to keep in mind.
Wow. Yeah, that's crazy. I mean, I guess it just doesn't sound like you exactly know the area and like a washout. Like, I don't know, if that's like a river thing or if that's, well, I don't know what that is, but I mean, the relationships have nothing to do with having some kind of Mother Nature, as we all know, does not really care about what our plans are. So, but that's
Exactly.
that's so cool, man. What was it that I was thinking? I kind of lost my train of thought. But you were talking earlier about, man, can't remember. But let's look at your we're looking at your Musher career summary, and that thought will come back to me.
It always does. It always does.
It maybe not. It might take a little longer, but we got your Iditarod career up, and damn, dude, you got like
23 years. 23 years. So I'm curious, we just, like Sean said, it's just the Iditarod that we're looking at your results. But how long were you in mushing before you even got to the Iditarod?
Yeah, so I've got a keen, encyclopedia type memory of the 90s. I got involved in the early 90s, and on ABC Wide World of Sports, and Swenson walks through the storm for 24 hours and wins over Susan. Susan's like, when a kid younger than that, I'm watching Susan win year after year, and I'd recorded on my VCR, and I remember getting in a big fight with my brother when he recorded over the VCR tape, and I was just loving it, and I got a book. And so I was 13, and a friend of my dad's had this old team, and we adopted them, and these 8 crusty old huskies, and they'd fight all the time. And we're in Southern Ontario. And believe it or not, there's not much mushing left in Ontario, but back then there was a lot of mushing going on. There was a lot of teams, and some of these guys were pretty serious, and they were bringing down dogs from Alaska. Next thing you know, Martin Booster wins the Iditarod record time, and the McEwens bringing down dogs off Martin's team. They bought a couple dogs off Martin's 92 team, and seeing those dogs with my own eyes and then connecting that with the pictures and stuff, it was just, I was done. And I was running 6 dogs, 60-mile races. And then by the time I was 18, I got a hold of Martin's number, and then timing just worked out. And he took me on as an 18-year-old at Happy Trails there. And so I worked with Matt Hayashida. And then the next year I got to run those pups I was raising on my yearling team in the year 2000. I was 20 years old, ran my rookie race with Martin's yearlings. And that was, then that apprenticeship, comes to an end. And then I go back and start building up my own team and run again in 05 with my own dogs, again in 09, 13, always intermittently, wanting to be in there every year. But it's so, especially being, not in the state. I think had I maybe been born in Alaska, it might've been a little different, but it's hard when you're so far away, and not to make excuses, but we find a way to get there. And then it wasn't until 2018 that we got more stabilized here, and then went, forward with a stronger effort to be in there every year, and had some sponsors and stuff. And so it's been a consecutive run since 2018 until now.
Gotcha. So I was kind of doing a little bit of research on your story, and I was curious, just talk to us about your time with working with Martin. Obviously a well-known, respected champion. And just, I'm sure that was kind of an integral piece in kind of like getting you on your own eventually. So I just was kind of curious about your time with him. And I know Sean has some friends that are currently working with him now. So just curious to kind of hear more about that.
Well, yeah. So that was, Martin's prime, I would say, or, yeah, well, Martin has such a huge prime, right? It's just the guy's endurance is unbelievable. And his work ethic. I was going into an environment where, like for me, it was like going to work for Wayne Gretzky or something. I'm just a young kid and you're going to work for your favorite musher. And it's like, so he had a big impression on me. But him and Kathy were so wonderful and hospitable. And, there was always a connection to his family during that time and being involved because their neighbors were supportive of Martin, of course. And the lessons learned and the habits that were instilled. I mean, a few times early on, I kept doing, because I'd been running dogs before. And when I, first talked to him, I'm like, well, I've been running dogs for 4 years. And he's like, well, that's not a good thing. I'd rather like you come here like green, so now I got to change all your bad habits. And that started to happen gradually. And by the time I was done at Martin's, I was like a copycat. I just did everything like Martin did. And I just tried to like mimic and copy everything the guy did. And I carried that forward into my own. And it wasn't until, building my own team that some things started to move and shift and adapt into my own style. But I realized the best way to success was to just do what he did, because he was, obviously a proven champion in the sport, and his way with the dogs and his family, and just, he was just an awesome mentor there. Yeah.
The Wayne Gretzky thing. It's like, dude, every time I even just talk to any of those guys, like I met Martin for the first time this last year. And I was like, he was like, I was in the yard and he showed up. I was in the dog yard. They're like finishing a tour. My friends work there. And he was like, hey, to like all his employees and the dogs. And then he like looked at me and he's like, I don't know who you are though. And then, my friend was like, oh, that's Sean Underwood. And he was like, oh, Sean Underwood, the famous Sean Underwood. And I was like, yeah, hey, how you doing? And like, he like shook my hand, looked me right in the eyes. And I was like, I had all these things I wanted to say to him. And I was so excited about that moment. And then I just was like, oh my God, like he's looking at me like, I don't know what to say, and, but, it sounds like, I know I'm decent friends with Matt Failer. I know Chad's working for him, and, there's a long list of people just like you that he's taken in and mentored, and then they've gone on to create their own kennel and their own dogs. And it seems like one of the main, the ability to have those relationships and that mentorship, and then kind of have you kind of graduate and go on and do your own thing, and then still be, he's still there to help you out if you need it. It sounds like he just really like lets you in, like you're part of the family. And when you leave, it's not like you're still part of the family. I'm sure every time you see him at the Iditarod start, you guys are like really excited to see each other. And he just seems like such a good guy. And I like, I worked for Jeff, who's like his mortal enemy. No, he's not. Yeah. They're actually, yeah. I would think they're like got respect for each other, of course. But, I was like, oh, Martin, whatever, and then I met him and I was like, oh, this guy's super, super cool dude. So, it's just, and he's out there scooping poop like with the rest of them, dude, still, it's awesome. Yeah. 39 straight Iditarod finishes. Greatest record in all sports.
Yeah. So when you're a rookie, running with his dogs, and he's like, you don't scratch unless there's a bone sticking out of your body. Like that's it. Like if you don't have leaders, then walk in front of your team and train a leader. Like you're not. And we had like a no scratch plan written in our book. Like we had a notebook, and he had the plan all laid out for us as running with his yearlings. And my team that year was 16 yearlings. There was not a single veteran dog in there to help lead. And I don't think I'd do that now, but that he trusted me to go with that group. I mean, and anyways, yeah, the no scratch plan, like this is the step one. If you think you're going to scratch, you do this: sleep. Second thing you do is eat. Third thing you do is, if you can get to a phone somebody who can talk to you if you're still thinking you want to scratch. But like, it was kind of like the instructions if you're in trouble, and yeah, just bringing those young dogs along. Now, the next year, some of those dogs graduated, and he had his worst Iditarod to that date. I think it was like 24th that year, and his B team with Andy Motoro beat him to Nome, and he comes back and blows out the 9-day barrier. And some of those dogs that I raised were on his team. In fact, Bronson, obviously I should have taken the dog. He ran with Andy the next year, but Bronson was like dog number 17 or 18 for me in that rookie year. He was a leader, but he just wasn't that out. I don't know. He just wasn't as strong. I don't know why, and then in 2002, Martin had Bronson lead him to Golden Harness victory. And that was really cool to see some of the pups I raised win the Iditarod in record time. That was fun.
Damn. Yeah. 2002. Right. Yeah. That is, I love hearing those stories of dogs that you're like, he's not the best leader, but like he'd probably be a pretty good fit read. And then he's like the Golden Harness winner or whatever, the one that takes you to the top 5. And I do remember what I was thinking, Brendan.
Here we go.
This is going to be way off subject now, but it was that when it comes to like qualifying races, you could argue that like the 200 and 300 mile races are good qualifiers for like traveling the trail, good qualifiers for like, taking care of your team. And being like around other teams and around other dogs, and experiencing like an event like that. But like the schedule that you're running with your dogs, the speed and the distances, oftentimes in these like mid-distance races are really nothing like the Iditarod. Like Kobuk 440, you got like 70, 80, 90, 100 mile runs. Same with Cusco, same with Knik. Copper Basin, you got 18 hours of rest mandatory. So you don't, like, you're not really training like for an Iditarod schedule. And then the biggest thing is, it's like when you run a 450, I don't know what the mandatory rest is for it, but you're running that distance and and I think in the Kobuk 440, you see this too. I haven't run it, but I know that race is considered to be one of the toughest races out there. But, you see the dogs take that like 200 to 300 miles at that distance, right? There's something changes, and you don't, you're not, maybe it's even at 350 miles and you don't see that, at a 300 mile race. Cause you just kind of like start at a full tank and then you just kind of empty the tank and then the dogs take a nice rest and a couple days and they're ready to rock again. So like, what do you think about like that? I've talked about this before in other episodes. It's like, that metabolic change, they get to that, trail and travel mode that you really don't unlock until you get to like the second third of the Iditarod. Like how would you describe that to someone wondering?
Yeah, for me, that's there's a shift there. I think the dog's body is, undergoing this stress. And it's a profound stress, and the body has to kind of decide how it's going to react to that stress. And so they're going to like step up to the challenge and choose to live and survive, or the body might further deteriorate and cop out. And then you see those signs of a dog not eating or kind of bummed out or just not thriving. And maybe you send that dog home earlier than you had hoped because his body isn't adapting. And it might happen, Nikolai, McGrath, Ophir, that stretch of the Iditarod. And I've seen dogs, in 2005, I remember the not eating much and just trying so hard to get them to eat, but still having to keep moving, and then, by the time they hit Nikolai, it cooled down and then they start scarfing the food like, oh boy. But it was too late for some of them. They had already, not kept up on hydration enough and they had to go home early. But the ones that held on, and then they rallied and got strong and were able to finish the race. So it's a big turning point in there, I think. So yeah, the 450. That's why I think if a musher's out there listening, they're thinking about getting ready for Iditarod. I mean, the 450 mileage is awesome because you get to go beyond. And for me, I ran the 450 last year, and Pelly Crossing is 250 miles in, and that's a good. That's when you're kind of okay. We've come quite a ways now. But if you think about what's ahead, you have big remote trail ahead. You have two big massive climbs through the mountains there, Eureka and Solomon's Dome, I think they're called. And yeah, you've got some really remote travel up ahead. You want to make sure what you're leaving with out of Pelly, is solid. Those dogs are solid. So that's the beauty of the 450 takes you into that zone, and that's when the magic happens, in my opinion. That's when you really get deep with your dog team, and you take it to that next level, and you get down deep. And I just love that. That's what I love about Iditarod, and 300-mile races are less appealing to me because you don't get to the place. And so that's one thing I wanted to bring up about the Yukon Quest 450 is the mandatory rest. And what was interesting when I surveyed the mushers, so go back a little bit, with these boards discussing rules as the Yukon Quest is going to reunite with the 1,000-mile race. There was some desire on the Canada side to implement a higher level of mandatory rest into the 1,000. The traditionalists wanted to see it remain the same. Then there was some back and forth. There was some issues around the mandatory rest that led to some of the conflict between the two. So then last year and the year before, the Yukon Quest Canada has experimented with applying that higher degree of mandatory rest, but allowing the musher to take that mandatory rest on the trail. So that's the unique part of this, that I don't think a lot of mushers out there understand what we're doing here, because we're using the technology of the trackers to allow the musher to apply mandatory rest on the trail, not just in the checkpoint. So if you got 80 miles to a checkpoint and you're not comfortable running your dogs 80 miles and you want to be competitive and you have a great team, but it's like heat of the day. It's like, wait, I'm going to split this run in half. I'm going to throw a 3-hour rest on my team. It's for the better of the dogs, but it doesn't take you out of the competition, because the team that likes to march goes right through and then all of a sudden gains that 3 hours on you. Basically, you let go of the race if you take that rest. But now you're not. So this is an interesting dynamic. The 450 has 38 hours of mandatory rest, and it sounds like a lot. But there's 2 6 hours and an 8 hour. The 8 hours kind of like your halfway regroup mandatory vet check at Pelly Crossing. So that's kind of the reset. And the vet crew wants to see 8 healthy dogs leaving that check point. But yeah, so then there's 18 hours left for the musher to take on the trail. So as of now, the plan is they're going to be combining tracker systems to double down on the accuracy. They're going to be bringing in the Geo Racing trackers. So that's a company out of France. They did the Krill Paws series. They're going to have those and the Spot Tracker, both systems running, and to get that ping time speeded up. And there's a few little technical things that are going to be tested out in advance. The goal is to build trust in this system so that other mid-distance races might look at this. So that was interesting on the survey. When I asked about this, a high percent of people said, yeah, they want this. But then equally number of people said, we want this, but we don't trust it. And it was actually a lower number of people that didn't want it at all. So it was a strong indicator that we're on the right track, but we got to build trust, because I think mandatory rest is a controversial topic in the sport of distance mushing, and we're coming at it from a different angle than anyone else right now. And my theory, like kind of, when you look at a 1,000-mile race like Iditarod, I think the race is so long that the musher has to has to consider the distance and has to be conservative, no matter how competitive. Like even the intense front pack mushers still have a level of conservation there. They can't just go hell bent for, they have to be careful to, and rest their team enough to what their team can handle. So I think when you get less than 500 miles or, where we are, the 450, 300, if you don't have enough mandatory rest, there is mushers that will just go straight and or rest less than, because they know the finish line is close enough that they can, and their team can handle a 100-mile run here and there to, a 200-mile race becomes 2 runs, 100-mile rest, and then another, 100-mile run, and then another 100-mile run, and it's over, and the musher that decided to rest his team, so it's, again, a controversial thing. The Cusco has a low mandatory rest, but it's right on the line, and the best teams obviously handle it, and it really teaches the musher a lot there. But it's like, and anyways, I've given you a lot of rambling there, but I wanted to get that out there so that mushers can think about what we're doing over here on the 450 with that mandatory rest.
That's wild, dude. 38 hours, and you said an 8, 6, and a 6. That's 12 plus 8. So 20 hours at checkpoints, 18 hours on the trail. I'm assuming there's like, what is it, like you're not doing it like to the minute. You're doing it like every half hour or to an hour for the on trail time.
Yes, 30-minute increments.
Yeah.
And so how it will work, the musher, it could work one of two ways. So the musher writes down in there, will be submitted at the next checkpoint to the race personnel. Then those numbers will be cross-referenced with the tracker data. And if they're right on the money, there's no problem. If we see consistently that a musher might be stretching that out or it's not aligning with the tracker, then that's going to have to be looked at closer. So what I'd like to see happen, and what might happen, is those spot trackers have that button where you put I'm okay. It's an I'm okay button. It's not like the helicopter button. It's the I'm okay button. That you push that when you stop, and then push it again when you go. So it's like a red light, green light, and that's an accurate ping to the exact time with the exact location, and it would be pretty. So yeah, people that maybe don't like the idea of this need to remember also that in checkpoints, you have some human error going on too. Sometimes you get to a checkpoint and the volunteer maybe writes down the time a minute or two different than what you actually left or you actually arrived at. So, but there's been 2 races now with this going on, testing it out, and it's proven to be very, very accurate.
Oh, that's pretty cool. Yeah, that is a tricky thing. Like you got copper basins got a lot of checkpoint rest, and you can't. And there's some long ass runs in that race, and it's like, if you want to be competitive, you will not camp on that trail. And so that's a really cool idea. And I didn't. This is like news to me. I didn't know this.
Yeah.
And
is that something that you're only really seeing on the Canada side of races that are experimenting with that?
Or there's the 2 other races, whatever that is.
Well, I assume those were in Canada, right?
Yeah, sorry, I should have been more clear. The 2 other, I meant the previous 2 quests. Last year's Quest 450 and the year before that was a Quest 300. So the Yukon Quest Canada has been experimenting with this the last 2 years. So it's got some history behind it now, again, in effort to build trust. So it's like wanting to build a system where, the race isn't decided by who marches their team the longest and takes the least amount of rest. It's like, how do you compromise and add more rest into these races? Because I see it like both ways. I see the top elite teams in distance mushing, as they demonstrate in the Iditarod every year, can get strong, healthy teams to the finish line in fine fashion. And those dogs come in great. And the best mushers know how to do it, and they're brilliant and they're experts, And you can see Dallas and others and, have strong moving dogs right to the finish line because they did it right, but somehow they're at the front of the race. So that happens. But sometimes you have people like, that may be pushing beyond where their team is ready for. And that's also a reality too. And if, they may end up scratching earlier or leaving more dogs behind or having to then add a whole bunch of rest. But yeah, it's different levels of experience and ability. And I think it's great, but this is a way to like allow mushers to take that extra rest on the trail and remain in the mix. It does put maybe a little bit more emphasis on speed. A little bit last year, for example, Michelle Phillips dominated the race. And I think last year the mandatory rest was 36. I think we're up to 38 this year. I have to look back. She took a little bit more than the minimum requirement. And me and my second team, we took into the 40s. And I felt I didn't want to take any less rest than that on the team that we had. We had some young dogs in there, but so it allows that flexibility because a lot of us distance mushers, we don't like to stay at checkpoints either.
Right.
We like to go camp out on the trail because that's our favorite part. And so we're not obligated to camp in the checkpoints all the time.
So essentially it's like you're folding in what you're eventually going to stop regardless of if you're at a checkpoint or not. You're kind of like folding in your accumulated rest, whether, like I said, whether it's at a checkpoint or not. I'm curious, like, do you feel like this levels the playing field a little bit? Do you feel like it, like, I guess I'm just curious, like, what did you see from like the difference in the last two quests? I guess the ones before this, they're all unique because you didn't have the 450 or the 300 going usually, did you? But I'm just curious, like, what it does to, like, I guess it makes it more of a race for everyone that's not at the top, or.
I believe that I think your strongest team is still going to win. Like I say, I think Michelle dominated right from the start. Been another team there that I think it allows you to be because if you didn't have that mandatory rest, you're going to have you will have teams cutting rest right down to the bare minimum. So last year the Fairbanks side ran a 500-mile race and they had hardly any mandatory rest. It was very little, and I didn't see it with my own eyes, but I was told that many teams were just plodding in there that last run from Nenana at a snail's speed. Brent Sass had that elite Iditarod championship level team that did it. They thrive. They're just going to dominate. And who is it? Jeff King's team there. Is it Amanda? Yeah, I think she came on strong late because she had applied a little more rest earlier. But yeah, that's an example of a race that had very little mandatory rest. And there's a lot of marching and a lot of slow moving teams out there. Here's another point. During a debate about this topic, you had the vet at the Yukon Quest Canada pipe up. It's like, yeah, but we didn't have any dogs to look after. We had like all the dogs that were dropped for minor reasons. We didn't see any like detrimental, sometimes in these long races, in the very worst case, you might have a dog the vet wants to put on intravenous, which is very rare. But I mean, that's something that the vets were like, yeah, at least we didn't have to do that. The dogs were like all perky and strong and zippy and coming into the finish line, just cranking. So I think there's a lot of benefits. They also emphasize the race, volunteers and vet crews, it appeals to them more to be involved in an event where the dogs are perkier and better rested. And so that's just something to consider as well.
Yeah, I feel like the biggest thing is like you can, like, if you're running only checkpoint rests, you basically, if you stop on the trail for an hour, like every hour you stop on the trail, it's just like plummets your chances of like doing any kind of competitive race. But if you can just stop literally anywhere, then you taking an extra 2 hours of rest isn't, let's say you were planning on a 4-hour rest on the trail, you take 6, and now your team's okay, maybe you can cut that rest later on down the trail, and you have, kept your team strong, or kept your speed is a big thing. So it makes an emphasis on speed, and then it like lets you kind of be a little bit more, there's like, you have so much more flexibility. I mean, like you can literally stop anywhere you want. So it's like, once you leave a checkpoint after your 6-hour rest, it's like, well, I left the checkpoint. Like, I got to, if I'm going to stop, I got to stop at the next one. And you can stop on the trail, and experienced mushers know when to make that call. But it's so much easier to make that call if you're like, to what point do what you're seeing in front of your sled, are you going to say, oh, okay, I'm not quite seeing the body language or the speed that I want to see. Why don't I err on the side of caution and yet still remain competitive? Maybe I'll drop from 2nd to 4th or whatever, instead of it's like, all right, now I'm out, So that is cool. I think it does add a little extra competitiveness, and it does give mushers so much more flexibility with like how they wanted. They can't. Some people love the checkpoints. You like being on the trail, maybe. But like Wade, it always brags about checkpoints, dude. I love you. Got hot water. I'm sleeping in a bed. I'm, all the good things. So it's like, you pick whatever you want to do. So yeah, that's a really cool idea, and especially for mid distance races. I really don't think Iditarod or Yukon Quest 1000 needs to have 100 mandatory hours of trail. It's like you gotta rest your team because you're going 1,000 miles, right? Like it's just unsustainable to be running 100-mile runs a third of the way into the race.
Yeah. So I am curious, if you have, what negative feedback have you gotten from mushers that were part of the last 2 quests? Like what are some of the other areas where maybe you kind of have to like iron out the kinks of this? I'm just curious.
Well, in the 300-mile race a couple years ago, Brent Sass won the race, and there was it didn't, for him, he has a lot of influence in the sport. He's an awesome guy for one. I like Brent. I'm an acquaintance, friend with Brent. So he's an awesome dude. But he comes from that, and he didn't like being held back by mandatory rest, whether it be checkpoint or on the trail, and having to stop more frequently to be able to accumulate that mandatory rest wasn't what he, and so he had some pushback on it, and he didn't think he'd race that kind of format again, and that was his take on it. What's interesting, the board that was in place on the quest at that time involved mushers like Sebastian Schnuel, and I don't know if Hans was in there or not, but there was some presence there that was, really advocating for this, people advocating for this that you would think wouldn't advocate for this. Sebastian used to be, the king of marching dogs, and running 8 to 12 hours, resting 3 or 4, and winning the quest in Iditarod. And then here he is advocating for this new system. And and I don't know, maybe Brent will think about it some more. But that's where the veterinarians were, pushing back on that a little bit. And so, again, the trust in the technology, thinking that if a race, like the example keeps coming up of the quest, was won by like the one year, I think Alan Moore beat Hugh Neff by like a second or a minute or something. It was just so close. And it's like, well, what if that happens, right? So what if you're going to have 2 teams running neck and neck, and then you start looking at the tracker data, and then there's some controversy around that. So that is the concern of most people that are leery, and the trust. And that's why I wanted to bring it up, because I would encourage more mushers to think about it and think about participating in the race that has that, and let's build some trust in the system, because I think it is trustworthy. And we're doing everything we can to make it as trustworthy as possible and get that data dialed right in and that ping rate dialed right down as close as possible. Multiple trackers to back up if there's an error. And then, but the race is also going on our system in part, like that, what the musher writes down as their stop and start time will have the most weight. That'll be given the highest priority, unless we start seeing there's problems or showing up and we get like repeated evidence or based on like that there's a discrepancy over and over on one particular musher, then a pattern might develop or something like that. And I get into the math and how it could work. Yeah. So I think we're a good.
Yeah.
So I was going to say, we're kind of getting close to wrapping up our hour with you. And I want to ask some Iditarod related questions.
Before you do that, let me just close your remarks on that. Is that it's good to see. And can you hear us, Aaron? Yeah, I thought you might be frozen.
Okay. Aaron, if you can hear us, try exiting. Yep. Oh, we're having trouble seeing you. Can you?
Yeah, maybe exit and re-enter because your video is frozen.
You're frozen on our end.
Oh. Your video is frozen, and we only hear you coming in a little bit.
Okay.
Yeah, you can just like exit and then click the link that we gave you again.
So leave the meeting, then re-enter?
Yeah, just click that same link and you'll come right back in, yeah. It's like, that was like the worst connection thing, but it's like been almost like you pretty much catch it.
Yeah, and it's like, we probably can like slightly edit it a little bit out.
It's like 5 seconds every time or 10 at the most.
So like this is an example of like if you didn't restart, if you didn't close everything out, like those little things matter an hour into our recording.
What?
Like those little suggestions.
Yeah.
This is where it matters in my opinion.
Sure. Yeah.
It's like if we're just doing a quick little 20-minute thing, it probably is gonna be fine. But because it's so long, it's just gonna be more and more at meat. Second last time too. So we want to have a closing remark on this.
Just on that topic.
Where you were. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, yeah, we were having a little bit of connection issues, but we kind of got like the gist of what you're saying. And I just was like, just kind of cool to see like you got different opinions and Brent, shares his, and they might be on one side of the spectrum, and y'all have, the committee thinks, all right, this is kind of like a good way to evolve, the rules. And, there's probably a middle ground somewhere in there. That's where it's going to end up being. And, it's okay to like disagree with the rule. If that's how you feel, like, it's good to voice that thing. Like, how can we like, and I think it's cool to see like, all right, we're having like a conversation. We're trying to change something, and we're happy that like people that might not want to do it are sharing, hey, we don't want to do it. Instead of just talking shit, they're just like, hey, I'm not so sure about this thing. And that's okay. And I think it's a cool idea. And there's a bunch of races, and, it's cool to have this race. This might be something that attracts more mushers, and it might deter a couple, and there's nothing that you can do to make the rules so perfect that every musher loves the rules. There's no set of rules that's perfect, so that if Brent is the guy that doesn't like it, that's fine. If you go towards maybe his style, then you're going to have other people that don't like it. So, it's okay to have those differences of opinions, and I think that's something that you can spill over to politics and to every other thing in the world. And it's cool to see. All right, we're having an ongoing discussion, and we'll see where it ends up.
And I think it also sounds like there is a willingness for them to hear out the mushers and to implement some changes, and maybe for things to not just be doing it because that's how we've been doing it. So yeah, I think overall that's a lot of positive things. And I'm sure we could like talk about, I feel like it's crazy that we've been talking about
pretty much the Quest
for a majority of the episode. I feel like we probably could continue down this topic for sure.
Sounds like healthy communication is happening within y'all's organization. And, maybe if my future girlfriend's listening, we could have a similar kind of communication.
Yeah, no, it's been fun and it's been good. I think there's good energy going on there. And I just, I think the future's bright. We're seeing strong, lot of entries this year up from last year. It's going to be a great race. We got Paige and Cody coming over to race, and there's Michelle again, and we'll have a team in there, and with Mela Hill, it's going to be a beauty race and fun to watch. So now that you kind of know some of this back end stuff, it'll be more interesting for you guys to pay attention to when it happens.
I'm really excited. I got to be honest, like, there's a lot of mid-distance races I haven't like really buckled down and put in the proper time to follow this Canada side of the race. So I'm glad that now I'm pumped about it and excited to follow it, and it's going to be all these events in one weekend, and we're going to try our best. We're going to try our best to cover it as best we can. But Brendan, we're going to kind of switch subjects and talk a little bit about Aaron and his career and his dogs.
Yeah, I mean, we've exhausted a lot of time, but I definitely wanted to kind of talk about your career as a musher, and not having as much time left. I guess I kind of wanted to talk about like some highlights of yours, whether it's in the Iditarod or just in general in a race at all,
and your dog team. Yeah.
Well, I spent a few years in there focused on the Wyoming stage stop. That was a pretty epic few years of mushing there. Deep down, my heart was with Iditarod, but back in 08, 09 and that, I started working with Megan Routley, and at the time, her business partner, Jason Smith, they run dog sledding tours down in Lake Louise, and we kind of all collaborated, and I went to Wyoming and started racing the stage stop, and then we went 4, 3, 2, 1 in those years. In 2013 was the big year, and to have won that race against primarily Buddy Streeper, that it's such a force, that kennel. They don't ever lose hardly. And to beat the Streeper kennel is just something like it's a once in a lifetime thing to happen. So unless you're Annie Malo, they've been able to repeat it there. But the Wyoming stage stop, that's a pretty exciting race. We learned a lot. We got into the whole waxing of a different stage and a different community every day. It was just an amazing time. But in 2013, I transitioned back to Iditarod. And then there was a big gap though. I met my now wife, Eva, and we have a young family. We have 4 kids, 9 and under. Hell yeah, that's the main reason for
what? How do you do that? You've done 6 Iditarods in a row. You have 4 kids, and you have how many dogs? We haven't gotten to your kennel size.
There's close to 60 dogs right now.
How do you stay afloat, man?
Well, we look at the dogs. It has to be from a business perspective. I have done a lot of work to pursue sponsorship and been able to get help from various sponsors. And then, we have our own business, a dog boarding daycare business, and I've got a great team built into that business. And then, the tours, as a musher, you look at a lot of the Iditarod mushers now, they're involved in tourism. And tourism is, I think, the key, as most obvious, it's the key. Like I started learning that 15 years ago. I realized I have to make money with my dogs, at least to pay for themselves. I'm not independently wealthy at all. I can't just afford to subsidize this with and like, take my other business to the ground to try to pay for my dogs. I just can't sacrifice that, and, taking care of the family and everything. So we do dog sledding adventures, and we've worked down in Lake Louise. We did a year in Yellowknife. We did 3 years. We're still doing tours here in Grand Prairie. Now we have 2/3 of the dogs in the Yukon. Problem is, I don't live in a tourism center, and so we're migrating the kennel towards the Yukon, where there's a strong tourism base. And this is year one for that. And Mayla Hill is our kennel partner, and she's amazing, and she's working with me on that. And we have most of the dogs in the Yukon right now getting ready for tour season.
Wow. Wow. Yeah. So I asked that question. I've mentioned it on a couple other episodes. I have a one child. He's almost 2 years old. And, I guess it's just because it's the first one or whatever, but I'm just like, man, like I'm over here, like, just trying to keep this podcast afloat with Sean and I. And I'm just like, I can't even imagine 60 dogs and trying to run, like I've done triathlon training, but like, I don't know, it just seems like there's even much more time commitment involved in the dog sledding, especially if you're talking about these long distance races. So Go ahead.
Oh, sorry. Just to tie that back into the beginning of this podcast, when you talk about Martin Boosert, when I was an 18, 20-year-old kid, his kids were the same. Rowan and Nikolai were the same age as my kids are now. And he was about the same age that I am now. And he's winning Iditarod, And so when you're in that position, you have a family to take care of, you have to be comfortable with releasing your team and letting other people run your dogs. I've been able to find great joy in watching other people run my dogs. And I think really to be successful in this, if you want to, you can't just hog it all and run them all yourself all the time. Maybe later when I'm older, I can do that. And maybe when you're younger, you can do that. But in your prime years like this, you can't do that. And you got to let other people run your dogs. So, I mean, I haven't run dogs much this year, and Mayla's at the stage in her life where she can pour it all in and just run like crazy, and as she should, and so I take joy. And as Martin, the year I ran with Martin's dogs, I probably put on 50 to 60% of the miles on his main core because he was so busy with his family and some other obligations and sponsorship stuff. It becomes like this business that requires your attention, and putting miles on the dogs maybe counter like to what other people like to believe, but like it becomes not the best use of your time because you can trust somebody as good as you to take them out and get the miles on the dogs. So Martin would still come to the starting line with a miled up, ready to go team, and he knew them well, and he probably would have liked to train them more than he did. And it's the same for me now. It's like I go to Iditarod last year, and Mayla probably put on, 60, 70% of the miles on that team. But it's the reality of life, and you got to accept it. Otherwise, you can't do it.
Yeah. Yeah. There are a few guests that we've had on in the past where they're talking about how they've literally do everything. And I don't know how mentally they handle that, but I mean, it makes sense why there's like a lot of burnout in the world of mushing. It's like I feel like the people that are more willing to get that help and ask for it and accept it in situations where they hopefully like have more of a longer career, but man, I don't know how some of the people do it. Like, we were just talking about, we had Connor McMahon on. He's doing everything.
Yeah, you know that guy, Connor. Huh? What do you think of
him? Connor, I love Connor. I mean, he was with us for a season there, and it was awesome. I mean, he was steady. And again, what I saw in Connor when I first started running dogs and I got him, it was so exciting to get this young fella started, and I could see right away his natural ability with the dogs and his love for the dogs. and his ability to handle a sled on technical trails. He never had a problem. I'd look back and he's right there, and also he can stay warm like nobody. Him and Mela are maybe tied. They don't. I'm bundled up in layers and parkas, and they're wearing half of what I wear out on the trail, and they don't get cold. And I'm like, aren't you cold? Like, and he's not even cold. And he's wearing these little boots, and I'm like,
no, he's in his prime, dude.
I don't know. I'm not as I can get my game. I don't know. I have my moments of toughness and moments of greatness, but sometimes around these youngsters, I have felt secondary, but it's humbling. But Connor was a great help. And, I've had people like Connor and Taylor was with us for a year. And then Mela, of course, the last couple of years. And these people I've been able just to trust and turn them loose with my main dogs you just trust and let them go. And it's just wonderful to see them develop as young mushers and to give them that time to develop without having to go broke at the same time, So it's nice to help them get a foot up.
Sean, do you have any questions to kind of close things up?
I'm super thankful for you to be on the podcast, and you got your Elevation Huskies. If you want to promote your business, or if you want to promote people sponsoring you, or your the Quest 450, here's your pedestal. We only have a few hundred listeners, but that's something, man. So if you go ahead and tell people how they can follow you.
Yeah, they're going to look back and like I am listening to all the past episodes. It's like, why didn't I know about this podcast going on here? I'm tired of listening to Joe Rogan. I need to listen to some real mushing material here. And thank goodness, it's funny because Connor and I, we talked a lot about starting a podcast, and we thought, there really is a gap there. There's a couple little ones out there, but they don't quite, they're not going after it, and so we thought anyway. So you guys are doing it, and it's awesome. And so I want to thank mostly my wife Eva, who I wouldn't be here still running dogs without her, and the family, of course, and Jeannie Burns, who's been a steady sponsor, and right now I have Rosca and Pomeroy stepping up to sponsor the teams this year for the Quest, and there's been so many instrumental people keeping us going over the years, and it's been an awesome ride, and I think there's lots more to come. I'm not done with Iditarod. I might be a couple of years to get back, but when I do come back, I'm going to pull the Thomas Warner. I'll take a bunch of years off, then we're going right to the front. So
let's go. I love that. I love to hear that.
Well, my leader eagle, in 2020, never had I seen a tough-headed leader like that, and we're breeding to him now, and we got pups coming up, and they're just as tough-headed as he is. So we're going to have a whole fleet of eagles coming up the ranks and be able to have a confident team to run to the front of Iditarod here in the near future. So.
Heck yeah. Yeah, we're checking out your website, and it looks like super well put together. And so, we definitely recommend you guys go check out Aaron's website at the elevationsleddogs.ca, baby. .ca.
.ca. Yep.
Yeah. And that's exciting, man. I'm glad that we're going to see more of you here in the future. And we really, really appreciate you coming on. And man, I'm really excited to have gotten to talk to you. I've always seen you from afar. I'm like, who's this? I would see Aaron Peck. It's like, who is Aaron Peck? I have no idea. And he'd run an Iditarod, and I'd be like, well, Aaron Peck seems like he's got it figured out, but I have no idea who this guy is. And then I'd see you the next year, and the next year. Because my whole racing career,
you've been in every race.
Has been those 6 years of you, and maybe a little bit before that. And so I was like, because you're in Canada. It's like a slightly different sector, different slice of the same pie. So I was like, I'm so glad to have gotten to connect with you, man. And thanks so much for taking the time to talk to us.
Yeah, likewise. I don't know if you remember, I recall just a brief encounter with you at Don's cabin on the Gold Loop year. It was cold as hell. It was minus 50. And I was on my way back and you were on your way out. And I was parked next to you and you had Dallas's young team, I think, or his second team. And there was a leader you had and he was sitting there like barking to go, like he's just a dog possessed to go down the trail. And I was like, my eyes opened up. I'm like, I want that dog, you know. And you were putting the booties on and minus 50, getting ready to go, snot hanging off your face. It was awesome. Yeah.
That's so cool, man. Yeah. Dude, that dog, he was the ultimate cheerleader. And
what's his name?
God, what is it? I can't remember. It's spacing. It's there. It's in the vault. But
yeah,
he was funny. He was like one of Dallas's like, you know, best veterans. And like he just did, like he almost didn't pull the whole race, but I was like I never like he just like it was just enough to be like he's kind of pulling, right? You know, but like he was running and he was happy and he was eating and he was stoked and he was barking. And I was like, you know what, dude, I'm loving what I'm seeing. And, you know, I don't need you to pull. I just need you to lead. And, you know, he was great at like he was smart and he was excited. And yeah, he ran like a crab. He ran sideways. Pretty funny dog.
Good. Okay. Thank you, guys. Thank you so much.